Hi everyone and welcome back to the Hardware. So in today's video we are going to talk about pH, GH and KH. So this is going to be part 3. So part 1 was the nitrogen cycle and explaining the components within that. The second one, how to test for ammonia, nitrite and nitrate, and I also threw in pH in that as well, which I did mention that I thought pH needed a separate video because there is quite a lot that goes into it, a lot of explaining how it works and the different components that go into that. So I thought what better way but to do a video separately on that. So this one is going to be around pH, GH and KH and how all three connect together. So if that's something that interests you, so stick around and let's get started. Best place to start is from the very beginning. So basically, what is pH? So pH is the measurement of how the hydrogen ions that are present in a certain substance. In order to measure this, we have a scale going from 0 to 14, with 7 right bang in the middle being neutral. We have 0, which is very acidic, and we have 14 down the other end, which is very alkaline. So the pH scale was created by a Danish biochemist by the name of Søren Sørensen. I'm not going to attempt to say it in a Danish way because I can't speak Danish. And he created this pH scale in 1909. So all substances have a pH value, whether it be very acidic or very alkaline, or right bang in the middle, neutral. We can measure all this through the pH scale. So say for example, if you think of it as a chart where 0 being very acidic, you have substances like say battery acid that is acidic, battery acid, acidic. On the other end of the scale we have very alkaline substances such as bleach. Both in each other are really harsh, and then we have right in the middle, which is 7, we have water. Water normally measures around pH of 7. That's what we class as neutral. And in between those, so in between 0 and 7, we have the substance of vinegar, measure right in the middle, and then the other end, so between 7 and 14, right in the middle of that, we would have a substance such as soap. As I said, every substance can be measured, and every substance has a pH, goes from 0 to 14. There are exceptions, however, very rare cases. Concentrated hydrochloric acid, which would measure lower than 0. And then also on the other scale of it, we would have a substance that would measure more than 14. Sodium hydroxide solution, which would measure above 14. Those are sort of like the exceptions, but as a scale of things, pH is normally measured between 0 and 14. So you're probably thinking, how does this have anything to do with water quality? You've already said that water measures around pH of 7. Correct. Ideal drinking water is around 7. Variations of water have different variations of pH. Say seawater, for example, that's more around 8, where water that comes out of our tap, it's more around 6.5 to 7. So it does differ slightly. I'm going on UK at least. In the UK, the tap water normally comes out at a pH of about 6.5 to 7. I think in other countries sometimes it does differ. Possibly America might range at about 8. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. I don't have any experience with testing American tap water. I just have experience testing UK tap water. But there is variations throughout different countries of the world, so just bear that in mind. So when you're thinking of tap water from 6.5 to 7, so you're probably thinking, well, that's not much of a jump from 6.5 to 7, it's only 0.5. It might sound small, but pH has a logarithmic scale, so it doesn't go from, if you were to start from 6 to go to 7, that would be times 10, and going from 6 to 8, that would be 10 times 10. it is quite a significant jump in case of the pH. Best way to explain it maybe is every substance has a pH. So blood, for example, or at least human blood, measures at around 7.35 to 7.45. Animals slightly different. So if you think of it like that, if your blood was to shift too far in the acidic way, that's going to create problems. Vice versa, if it was to shift too much into the alkalinity, shift too much down the alkalinity route, that would also have severe health consequences to you. So in the case of measuring your pH, it would all depend on one, your tap water, and two, what kind of fish you want to keep. So say African cichlids, for example, they require a higher pH. So if your tap water is sitting at around 7, you're going to encounter a problem, because especially if you have wild caught cichlids. But now we're getting into reasons why pH is there. If your tap water comes out at around 6.5 to 7, most fish stores or fish breeders that are breeding fish in captivity, they're going to be used to that pH of around that, so it's not going to be too much of a shift for them. It's where you get into other sorts of species. So if you were, say, to example, want to keep African cichlids, they require higher pH. Especially wild-caught African cichlids, they're right up the scale, so that's like 8.4, 8.5. That they require really high. As well as on the opposite end of it, the invertebrates like shrimp, they prefer lower pH, so around 6. So there is certain ways that you can adjust it to create the perfect environment for your particular species that you want to keep. A lot of people say ideally don't chase your pH, keep it consistent, but sometimes that is impossible. If you're an experienced fish keeper, it is fine to adjust your water to the right pH to keep these particular species of fish. There is certain ways and means of doing it, but first to understand how you can change it, you need to understand what is the elements that changes it and why. Introducing GH and KH. So GH, general hardness, and KH, carbonate hardness. So we're going to start with GH, so general hardness of your water. So whether you've got hard water or whether you've got soft water, so it's general hardness. Two substances that go into that is calcium and magnesium. So for the purposes of this video, we're just gonna keep it simple. So calcium and magnesium, if you have say too much, then you're going to have hard water, or if you have too little, you're going to have softer water. However, like I said, for the purpose of this video, that's all we're going to cover, but there is certain test strips out there that you can get that break it down even further than that, because sometimes you can get much magnesium in your water and not enough calcium, and the only way to identify that is to break it down into a test kit that is specially designed for GH. And the ones that I showed you in the last video, they don't cover that, they just cover the general hardness of your water. So without getting too much into detail with it, that's the general overview of that. However, KH, this is what goes hand in hand with pH. So KH is the measurement of your buffering capacity within your water. So your buffering capacity against pH swings, which is what we don't want. We don't want severe pH swings, because it can affect your fish dramatically. If you have a high KH rating, then you're less likely to have severe pH swings, because your water has a buffering capacity to stop that from happening. So the thing to remember is KH always affects pH. So now we understand what KH measures and what it does. There's ways to control your level of pH, depending on which pH you want to go for, which fish you want to keep, which invertebrates you want to keep, which pH you need your water to be at. There's ways and means of controlling that. If you remember what I said earlier, that seawater has a pH of around 8, it stands to reason that elements that come from the sea would have a higher pH capacity too. So things like crushed coral, that's going to raise your pH, putting that in. It's readily available, get that really easily, and it does look nice in the tank. If you don't like it in the tank and you prefer not to have that as a substrate in the tank, you can always put it in your filter as well, just put it in little sock bags, things like that. You can always do it that way if you don't like the aesthetic look of having crushed coral in your tank. So stuff like base rock, remember about base rock is it is a lot of calcium in it, so that's another thing that you need to take into consideration, but that is going to raise your pH level. Seashells is another, crushed coral, seashells, base rock, all sea elements, they have a higher pH. Sometimes people mention cockle shells and things like that for raising your pH. The only thing to remember with cockle shells is that it'll only raise it so high, it'll only go up to about 7, so it's no good if you want to raise it above 7. It's fine if you're down in the lower levels of pH and you want to raise it up to around neutral, that's absolutely fine to use that, but in that case it's not going to raise it any higher than 7, so just bear that in mind if people do tend to mention cockle shells. And of course, to raise your pH there is always chemicals that you can put in, so things like pH up. Me personally, I don't prefer to use that. I prefer to use more natural substance in the tanks, and I think it looks nice too. So it's entirely up to you, it's personal preference. If you choose to do that, it's going to have to be something that you continuously put in when you're doing your water changes. That's another thing to remember. It might have a little bit more upfront cost to buy the crushed coral, but in the long run, if you're using chemicals such as pH up, the thing that you need to remember is when you are doing water changes, you're diluting it, so you're going to have to reintroduce it every time you do a water change. So on the other side of things, if you want to lower your pH, there is lots of natural substances that you can use. So there is, firm favourite is driftwood. So driftwood, it is going to release tannins in your water. That's what it does. That is where it lowers your pH. So driftwood does tend to tan your water, and some people don't find that appealing. If you want to lower your pH, that's how you do it, because that's what's going to lower your pH, the tannins that's coming off the rock. The wood that a lot of aquarists use, Indian almond leaves, things like that, soil, plants, a lot of those is going to lower your pH. So say if you wanted to keep wild caught angels, which have a really low pH of about, I think it's 4.5 to about 5.5, or tetras, they have a really low pH of about 6. So aiming for those types of fish, you want to be lowering it right down. So you can use some of these things. A lot of people don't like the aesthetic look of the tannins that are coming out of the natural products that you're using, but the thing to remember is that's what's bringing down your pH. If you think of where some of these fish come from, if you think of trees, the greenery, the leaves, the wood, the soil, all of those is all tannins. That's if you think of it that way. So alkaline and lower pH is all of those things. If however you don't like the look of these tannins, you can always use RO water, reverse osmosis, if you choose to do so, and you will need to look into that a little bit more. That is going to change the general hardness of your water, because effectively you're taking out all of these trace elements from magnesium, calcium, you're taking them out of your water when you're using RO water. So there's a little bit more that goes into that, so it's that to bear in mind if that's the way you want to go. Or of course you could always go chemical route again, which is some pH down. Again, as I said, exactly the same with pH. Every time you do a water change, you're diluting it, so you are going to need to add that substance back into your water. If you choose to use any of these natural products to alter your pH, the thing to remember is with crushed coral, eventually it is going to lose its buffering capacity, and you will need to change it. And the same with wooden sources, so driftwood, that once the tannins have all been released, it loses buffering capacity, so it will need to be replaced. So that's just one thing to remember, that it doesn't work as quick as what you would do a chemical substance, but it isn't a lifetime set thing. You will need to change it eventually. These, however, are like slow releasing pH changes, so things like almond leaves and leaf litter, those slow releasing ones. You can get really fast ones, such as, I wouldn't advise using it, but if you did need to make a drastic change really quick, use baking soda to lower the pH, but again, I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you really knew what you were doing. So another way to help you remember these buffering capacities, It works the same as with blood. Your lungs and your kidneys are the two main organs that regulate your pH in your blood. So lungs can help do this by releasing carbon dioxide. So same as you breathe in oxygen and release carbon dioxide, that is the buffering capacity for your pH of your blood. Same as your kidneys. The kidneys function, it is to release waste, which is also a buffering capacity to release any nasty toxins within the body. So if any of those two areas go wrong, then you're going to have problems with the buffering of your pH, so it is going to affect your blood. So it works the same way as in with the water quality, everything affects it. So pH affects everything. The only difference is this is within the human body, where if you think of the water, that's their environment, that's what they constantly in, that's what they breathe in, that's how they get their oxygen, that's how they live. So that is the shift in the pH. So it's not actually within their bodies, it's the environment around them. That's all about pH, GH and KH. Bit of a hard topic. Hope I made that interesting. Hope I explained that in a way that's easy to understand. That is my goal, to make it fun and easy to understand, nothing too complicated. So I hope I explained that in a way that got that across. If you found this interesting, please give it a thumbs up and please consider subscribing, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye! Might have a little bit more upfront cost. Danish biochemist in 1907. It wasn't, it was 1909. Biochemist. Natural indicator for pH using natural substances. Red cabbage, beetroot, tea, blackberries. What on earth? Boil cabbage. Oh, boil it. Oh, yeah. Boil it. Boil the cabbage. Use the water. I see. Okay. I think I'll pass on that.